Hi, welcome to this look at the 14-day weather outlook. Temperatures during the first half of March were very close to the 30-year central England temperature average, and despite the spell of wet and windy weather which we had recently, things have now turned much quieter once again. Does that set the theme for the next week or two? I'm going to begin by taking a look at the picture across Europe and the North Atlantic. This sequence starts at 12 GMT on Wednesday the 17th of March. And what we can see here is high pressure centre to west of UK, and we've got winds coming around it, so from a northerly direction. And there's some patchy rain just in East Anglia and southeastern England. I'll begin the sequence so we can see what happens. And in the short term, there's some rain pushing across central and eastern parts of England, and that's associated with some colder air which is pushing in from continental Europe across southern and central parts of Britain. That had looked like being quite a major feature of the weather a few days ago. It looked like that was going to become quite persistent and bring in some really cold upper level air, even the possibility of some sleet or snow showers in the south and southeast. It's more like a glancing blow now, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But let's just continue the sequence to see how things develop through the coming days. And through the weekend, what we can see is high pressures declining southwards, and into the early part of next week, there's more of an Atlantic influence returning, well, at least across the northern half of UK. And you can see some outbreaks of rain associated with weather fronts, which are beginning to push in. There's also a little bit of sleet or snow there over the Scottish mountains, which this sequence is showing. But in southern and central regions, that high pressure, which is now centred over continental Europe, still really is a dominant feature of the weather, so it's still mainly dry in central and southern Britain. So that really takes us through the next week, and I said I'll just come back to the short term to show you that colder incursion coming in from continental Europe. This chart is showing upper level air temperatures on Friday the 19th of March at 15 GMT, and what you can really see is it's very cold air over continental Europe, and it's just pushing in briefly the edge of that cold block, pushing into across England and Wales before it slips away southeastwards as the high pressure moves southwards. So it will be taking the edge off temperatures in southern and eastern Britain, as this chart shows. This is forecast maximum temperatures at 15 GMT on Friday the 19th of March. And at this point what we can see is it's pretty mild up in the north and west of UK. Temperatures in Scotland and Northern Ireland into 12, 13, 14 Celsius. But further south and east, where that colder air is moving in from the continent, temperatures have been pegged back into single figures. And the following morning, 06 GMT, Saturday the 20th of March, what we can see is the potential for some patchy frost there in southern and central parts of England, with temperatures possibly just dipping down to around freezing or below. Somewhat milder up there in the northern parts of the UK. So that cold incursion in the short term looks like being quite a minor affair compared to with what some of the computer models were suggesting would be the case a few days ago. But what about beyond the next 7 days? This chart's for Saturday the 27th of March. It's come from the same GFS model run which we've just viewed the sequence of, and what we can see by then is the Atlantic's beginning to have more of an influence on the UK's weather, high pressure sinking away southeastwards into continental Europe, so we can expect a more changeable or unsettled theme gradually slipping southwards across the UK, bringing an increase in risk of rain. Never look at one computer model run in isolation at this range, so here's another one which is the Canadian model. It also shows something similar, with the Atlantic beginning to have more influence, but we've got high pressure centred there over Scandinavia still. So we would be seeing rain pushing across the United Kingdom, but that high pressure is not too far away. The Ecmp Model Run at the same time shows something a little bit different again. High pressure is a stronger feature over Scandinavia there. We do have the Atlantic trying to push in across the UK, trying to bring a more mobile pattern and wetter conditions, mild conditions. But it looks like with this model run, we're quite close to that battleground. Things could easily shift a little bit further west or eastwards. The Ecmp model run, this is the Ecmp, by the way, is the new version of the ECM model. It's not a production run yet, but it is being tested. It shows quite a similar picture at the same time. We've got the Atlantic trying to push in across the UK with high pressure centred there over Scandinavia. None of those model runs are showing a particularly cold picture at this time of year. It's really just all varying around how much of an influence the Atlantic will have, how wet it's likely to become, and whether that wet weather extends all the way southwards and eastwards across the UK or not. So to look at some of the ensemble data to dig into a little more depth, this is the GEFS 500 HPA height anomaly. You can think of this as showing basically pressure anomalies. So blues indicating lower than usual pressure, with the yellows and oranges higher than average pressure, there's a subtle difference between anomalies, of course, and saying high pressure or low pressure. Just because we're seeing a positive anomaly over Scandinavia, that doesn't necessarily imply that there will be high pressure rate. It just means the pressure forecast is for it to be higher than the average. But in this case, the pattern which has been shown actually does fit in quite well with what the ECM and ECMP and Canadian models were showing to a certain extent, with an increase in tendency for lower pressure to be pushing in across the UK, suggesting a transition back to more unsettled weather. This is for days 10 to 15, so from the 27th of March onwards. And this is also data from the GEFS ensemble model. It's showing the daily summary of the mean surface level pressure for London. So each column represents one day, and we're going out 16 days. The oranges and yellows are indicating high pressure, so very dominant to begin with. But then as we go further ahead, we can see there are more yellows, fewer oranges and greens, and even one or two blues beginning to appear. So it's showing a downwards trend in pressure there, although not really strong. The trend's quite clear, but not particularly dramatic. It's gently, it's showing high pressure gently declining. Just take a look at the comparable data table for Glasgow. Again, it's a similar pattern. If anything, it's the trend towards lower pressure becoming more influential is more marked. You can see more blues and a couple of purples up there. So that's following a similar pattern, but it's suggesting that in the northwest of UK, pressure will be lower, the Atlantic will be having more influence. So again, it's fitting in with some of those earlier charts which I talked through. In terms of precipitation, well, there is some rain in central and eastern England in the short term, as we saw in that sequence, but then it becomes pretty dry again, of light greys and dark greys. Light greys are indicating no rain on a particular day, and dark greys are just indicating the potential for light rain in that time slot. And as we go further forward, what we can see there through the second half of the 16 days is an increasing tendency for rain, with some purples, blues on here, greens and yellows. All those colours are indicating computer model runs in the ensemble which are forecasting rain in that given time period. For Glasgow, what we can see is it's a similar trend, but once again it's more marked. The blues and purples become increased by greater amounts, so as we go through that second half of 16-day period, so suggesting there's a greater risk of rain, more rain than in southern Britain. So pretty typical really as the Atlantic begins to become more influential. But neither of those data tables are forecasting particularly wet conditions at this stage. They're just saying more changeable pattern and increase in risk of rain, but as I say, not overly wet at all if those turn out to be correct. In terms of 2-metre temperatures, I thought I'd show the graph. It's probably a little bit clearer in this instance from the data table. This one is for London. We've discussed the first sort of week, 8 days, and through the second half, so from days 8 to 16, no real trend. I mean, in the short term, it's that colder incursion, then temperatures recover quite quickly, and then they really stay pretty much around that average, perhaps maybe a little bit above average during the days, potentially some chilly nights there, and still a risk of patchy frost, but nothing too dramatic there at all. Fairly benign weather, I would describe it, for March. If we take a look at the Glasgow chart, it's showing the same thing. On this one, during days 8 to 16, there is possibly a downwards trend in temperatures shown there. It's pretty gentle. What I would read that as indicating is more of a westerly flow becoming established, so pressure dropping as we saw earlier, and perhaps some slightly colder air from the west-northwest getting into the mix at times, and that's showing up in some of those model runs. But again, it's nothing too dramatic at all. So just to take a quick look at the 35-day plots, as I like to do at this stage, to jump ahead a little bit further. This one is for York, these are for York, and I pick it because it's a relatively central location. And what we can see there, if we look into the early part of April, on the left-hand plot, which is showing 2-metre temperatures from the 35-day ensemble model, is they are more likely to be slightly above the 30-year average than below it. But again, at this stage, the anomaly is not particularly significant, but it is pointing to slightly milder rather than slightly colder conditions as we head into the early part of April. The right-hand chart is showing the mean surface level pressure, and what we can see through there is it's fairly stable during the second half of the plot as we go into April. It looks to be suggesting that if anything slightly above the average, 30-year average, which is not actually highlighted on here, but looking at that plot, it does suggest slightly higher than average pressure during the first half of April, which in turn, of course, would suggest the likelihood of slightly drier than average conditions. So to summarise, the first week should bring a good deal of dry weather to the southern half of the UK, although early in the period there is likely to be some rain around, particularly in central and eastern areas. In the north and particularly the northwest, it's a mostly dry start, but as we head through the second half of the period, the risk of rain is likely to increase as high pressure declines southwards and northern Atlantic influence begins to return. In the north and west, the days are likely to be mild, especially when sunny spells develop, but in central and eastern England, temperatures are going to be dipping for a time as that colder air pushes in from continental Europe. There is a risk of nighttime frost through the week, but I don't think they'll be widespread. They're going to be pretty patchy on the whole. The second week is likely to begin settled in the south, but the more changeable weather will be continuing in the northern half of the UK, and that probably sinks southwards through the course of the week. That leads to an increase in risk of rain in all parts of the UK, but it's not looking particularly wet. Temperatures are likely to be close to or slightly above the average through the course of the second week. So there we have it. That more or less summarises things. It's pretty much a sort of no drama, no fireworks forecast today. Of course, that's always a hostage to fortune in the UK, where things do become quite unpredictable after a few days looking ahead. But fingers crossed this time, the forecast will go to plan. So thank you for watching it, As ever, if you enjoyed it and found it useful, please remember to hit the subscribe and like buttons below. Thanks very much now. Bye.